I used to say it the way you say your own name when someone asks. Automatic, practiced, almost soothing. Just roommates. The words were a key I kept in my pocket, something I could press into any lock, any awkward pause, any sideways look. Just roommates, I'd repeat, smiling too brightly, like I was handing out a harmless fun fact instead of covering up the softest, most dangerous truth I'd ever held. Are you still living with Mona? My aunt would ask at holidays, her voice syrupy with that tone adults use when they're trying to sound casual. Yep, I'd say, reaching for a glass, reaching for anything. We're just roommates. At the office, my coworker Dana would bring in a tray of donuts and do the same scan she did every Monday morning. Who's tired, who's hungover, who's glowing. The scan always lingered on me, as if she could smell something warm under my sweater. Big weekend? She'd tease. I'd shrug. Not really. Mona and I just stayed in. We're, just roommates. And then there were strangers, which was somehow worse, because strangers didn't owe me gentleness. The barista at our neighborhood coffee shop would watch Mona brush a crumb from my lip with her thumb, quick, a flash, and the barista's eyebrow would tilt up, just a degree, like a door opening. I'd laugh too loudly. We're just roommates. I said it to Uber drivers who asked if we were sisters, to landlords who wanted to know if we had boyfriends, to neighbors who saw us carrying groceries and finishing each other's sentences. I said it to myself in the mirror, mouth full of toothpaste, hair a mess, Mona's robe hanging off my shoulder like it belonged there. Just roommates, just friends, just anything but what the warmth in my chest kept insisting. The apartment had been ours in the way certain spaces become you. Not the way a lease says you own it, but the way your body knows where the floor creaks, where the afternoon light pools, how the air smells when the radiator kicks on. We'd moved in together after college because it made sense. We'd been inseparable then too, in that bright, exhausted way seniors are when they're clinging to the last soft edges of campus life. We told everyone it was practical. Split rent, split utilities, split the cost of living in a city that chewed up new graduates and spit out their savings. We didn't tell anyone about the first night we shared a bed in our new place. Not because we planned it. Not because we looked at each other and said, this is what we are now. We were just tired. The mattress delivery had been delayed. Boxes were everywhere. The only soft surface was the couch that still smelled faintly like someone else's life. Mona, with her dark hair pinned up in a crooked clip and her cheeks flushed from hauling furniture, had stood in the doorway of my room, holding 2 pillows like a surrender flag. The couch is kind of gross, she'd said. I know, I'd answered, because my throat felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with dust. We lay on top of the blanket at first, separated by an invisible line we didn't discuss. The city outside our window hissed and hummed. Somewhere downstairs, someone's bass-heavy music thumped like a heartbeat. Mona's shoulder brushed mine when she shifted, and my whole body went alert like a deer hearing a twig snap. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie moment. It was a long, slow exhale. Mona's hand found mine under the blanket and threaded our fingers together as if it had always been that simple. When she turned her face toward me, her breath smelled like mint gum and late-night pizza. Kel, she whispered, and it wasn't even a sentence, just my name, soft. I turned toward her because my body had been turning toward her for years. We didn't do anything we'd have to describe in detail to prove it was real. It was a kiss that tasted like relief and fear braided together. It was her palm against my ribcage, steady, grounding. It was my hand in her hair, trying not to shake. Afterward, we lay in the dark and listened to our own breathing like we were waiting for sirens, like someone would burst in and say, "We caught you. We knew." In the morning, sunlight came through the blinds in pale stripes across Mona's face. She squinted and smiled, half asleep. "Well," she said, voice husky like she'd been singing. "Well," I echoed, and then, because I didn't know what else to do, because I'd already learned the shape of denial, I added a little laugh. We're still just roommates, right? Mona stared at the ceiling for a long moment. I watched her swallow. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Just roommates." We made it a joke. That was the first trick. Make it a joke and you can pretend it isn't a decision. We texted each other memes about roommate benefits. We nudged each other when sitcoms made the same tired punchline. We created a language made of sarcasm and winks so we wouldn't have to call anything by its name. And then it became ordinary, which was the second trick. If it's ordinary, you can convince yourself it's harmless. Mona's shampoo migrated to my side of the shower. My sweaters ended up in her closet. We learned each other's sleep patterns like a new kind of weather. She liked the fan on even in winter. I liked 1 foot outside the blankets. She talked in her sleep sometimes, murmuring nonsense that sounded like she was bargaining with invisible ghosts. I'd hush her without waking, smoothing her forehead, and she'd settle like she knew my touch was home. We were intimate in 100 small daily ways that had nothing to do with skin. She knew how I took my coffee and how I spiraled when I hadn't eaten. I knew when her laugh was real and when it was armor. When she got sick, I tucked her into bed and made soup and pressed cool washcloths to her forehead. When I cried on the kitchen floor after a brutal day at work, she sat with me, back against the cabinet, and held my hand like she was anchoring me to the earth. Just roommates, I'd say in those moments, and it sounded like a prayer I was trying to believe. The lie got smoother with time. We went to weddings together, always as plus ones, always as if we'd both simply failed to find men. People nodded sympathetically. People made jokes. People said, "At least you've got each other," as if it were some consolation prize, and Mona would squeeze my knee under the table hard enough to make my eyes water. Sometimes, Mona would date. She'd go out with a woman from her yoga class, or a guy she met at a work mixer, and she'd come home smelling like other people's cologne or perfume. I'd pretend not to care. I'd pretend to be supportive, which I was, in theory, in the way you support someone walking toward a cliff because you don't know how to admit you want to grab their shirt and yank them back. She'd kick off her shoes, cheeks flushed, and I'd ask, "How was it?" "Fine," she'd say, dragging the word out like it didn't fit. Then she'd look at me too long, like she was waiting for me to say something else. I never did. I'd let her go to her room. I'd let the apartment feel hollow for an hour or two until she wandered back, barefoot, and curled up beside me on the couch like she hadn't just tried on another life. On nights like that, our closeness felt like a rubber band stretched too far. Eventually, it would snap. Mona would climb into my bed just to talk, and her hand would find my waist and her mouth would find mine, and we'd pretend we were only releasing tension, only letting off steam, only doing something physical that didn't mean anything deeper. As if bodies don't keep records. As if my heart didn't rearrange its furniture every time she fell asleep with her forehead against my shoulder. The hinge came on a Tuesday, which felt offensive in its normalness. The day wasn't marked by thunder or dramatic music. It was just cold enough outside that the air stung when you inhaled, and the sidewalk smelled like wet leaves. Mona and I had been invited to a small birthday dinner for our friend Leah, someone Mona knew from grad school, someone I liked because she always asked real questions instead of the polite ones. The restaurant was dim, candles flickering, glasses clinking, the kind of place where conversations feel intimate even when you're talking about nothing. Mona wore a dark green sweater that made her eyes look brighter. I wore a black dress and kept tugging at the hem like it could protect me. We sat close because we always did. Mona's knee brushed mine under the table, casual. Her hand rested on my thigh for a second when she laughed, then retreated. We were skilled at those tiny touches, brief, plausible, deniable. Leah watched us the way people do when they're putting together a puzzle in their head. When the conversation shifted to housing, someone complaining about rent, someone else talking about moving in with a boyfriend, Leah turned to us. "You two are still living together, right?" she asked. "Yep," I said too fast. "Just roommates." The phrase came out like a reflex, like I'd been trained. Mona smiled, but it was the kind of smile that looked pinned on. Leah tilted her head. "Can I ask something?" My stomach tightened. "Sure." She took a sip of her drink. Her eyes stayed on mine, gentle but steady. "Why do you share a bed?" The world did that thing where it narrows. The sound of the restaurant, laughter, forks scraping plates, the low hum of music, blurred into static. My cheeks went hot. Across from us, someone was mid-sentence, but their words became distant, like they were underwater. Mona froze beside me. I felt it in her posture, in the way her shoulders stiffened against mine. Leah didn't sound accusatory. She sounded curious, like she already knew the answer, but wanted to give us a chance to choose honesty. Her question wasn't the kind you can laugh off easily. It wasn't, "Are you two together?" It was a question anchored in a detail, a fact. It was like she'd reached into our apartment, pulled out our second pillow on my bed, and placed it right there on the table between the candles. I swallowed. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. "We don't," I blurted. "We don't share a bed." The lie landed with a soft, ugly thud. It was worse because it was so obviously a lie. Leah's eyes flicked to Mona, then back to me. There was no judgment in her expression, just a quiet sadness, like she'd watched someone flinch away from a hand offered in peace. Mona cleared her throat. "It's complicated," she said, voice careful. Leah nodded slowly. "Okay." She didn't push. She let the conversation move on, which somehow felt more devastating than if she'd challenged us. It meant she'd seen enough. It meant she was giving us space to decide what we could live with. For the rest of dinner, I barely tasted anything. My mind kept replaying the question, why do you share a bed? Not do you love her, not are you sleeping with her, just why do you share a bed? Like it was obvious that two people who shared a bed were sharing more than rent. On the walk home, the city felt sharper. The air cut into my lungs. Mona's hand brushed mine once, then slipped into her coat pocket. Leah didn't mean anything by it, I said, because I needed to fill the silence with something. She was probably just being weird. Mona's laugh came out brittle. She wasn't being weird. We walked half a block like that, our footsteps in sync, the streetlights turning everything pale. Then Mona stopped. Right there on the sidewalk, in front of a closed bookstore. She stopped like her body had reached the end of what it could carry. "Kelly," she said, and my name sounded different in her mouth now. Less playful, more raw. I stopped too. My heart started pounding like it wanted out. "I'm tired," she said. "Tired of what?" I asked, though I knew. Mona stared at the pavement. Her breath puffed in the cold. Tired of pretending we're doing something harmless. Tired of telling myself it doesn't mean anything because it's easier that way. Tired of hearing you say, just roommates, like it's a spell. My throat burned. "Mona!" She looked up. Her eyes were glossy, not quite crying, but close. "Do you hear yourself? Every time you say it, it's like you're pushing me away with your mouth even when you're holding me with your hands." I flinched because it was true. The words had become a weapon I didn't mean to wield, but I wielded it anyway because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. "We're fine," I whispered, and it sounded pathetic, even to me. "We're okay. We have a good thing. Why do we have to label it?" Mona's face tightened. "Because I'm not a side effect of your life, Kelly. I'm not something you do when you're stressed. I'm not a habit." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My chest felt full of cotton and nails. Mona's voice softened. "When you get scared, you make it small. You call it physical, you call it nothing. But it's not nothing. It's you and me making a home in the same bed. It's me reaching for you in the dark and knowing you'll be there." A memory flashed. Mona half asleep, pulling me close when I woke from a nightmare. Mona kissing my temple when she thought I was still asleep. Mona buying my favorite cereal without asking because she knew I'd had a hard week. The countless times her love had shown up in the quietest forms. My eyes stung. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, finally, the words scraping their way out. "I don't know how to be seen. I don't know how to explain it to people. What if they look at us different? What if I look at us different?" Mona asked, barely audible. "What if I start believing you?" That broke something in me. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. In a slow, internal way, like ice cracking on a lake. Because the truth was, I had started believing myself. I had started believing that Mona was temporary, that what we had was a loophole, a private indulgence that didn't require courage. I had started acting like our love was something I could tuck away, like out-of-season clothes. I stepped closer. The street was empty. The bookstore window reflected us faintly, two women facing each other under a streetlight, their breath mixing in the cold. "I don't want to lose you," I said, and my voice shook. Mona's jaw clenched. "Then stop hiding me." The words landed like a demand and a plea at once. I thought of Leah's question, how gentle it had been, how easy it would have been to laugh and say, "Because we're in love," how hard it felt to imagine saying those words out loud, even now, even here. I looked at Mona's face, familiar as my own hands, the curve of her mouth, the tiny freckle near her eyebrow I'd traced absent-mindedly 100 times. I realized with a strange clarity that the lie wasn't protecting us. It was shrinking us, erasing us, making something vast and real into something small enough to deny. "I love you," I said, and it came out like a confession, like I'd been holding my breath for years. Mona's eyes widened. For a second, she didn't move, like she didn't trust the words. Then her shoulders sagged, and she let out a shaky laugh that turned into a breathy sound that might have been a sob. "Say it again," she whispered. "I love you," I repeated, louder this time, and the words felt like stepping into sunlight, terrifying and warm. Mona stepped forward and pressed her forehead against mine. Her hands came up to cup my face, thumbs brushing my cheeks. "I love you too," she said, voice thick. "So much it hurts." We stood like that in the cold, holding each other up. It wasn't a kiss that solved everything. It wasn't a magical turning point where the world suddenly became safe. It was just honesty, shaky and real, between two people who had been pretending they were not the center of each other's lives. When we got home, the apartment felt different, not because the furniture had moved, but because the air had shifted, like the walls had been listening all along and finally heard us tell the truth. We didn't rush. We didn't fall into bed like we were trying to prove something. We made tea. We sat on the couch with our knees touching, the steam curling between us. "What do we do now?" I asked. Mona's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. "We stop calling it nothing," she said. "We decide what we want. And we take it one person at a time." My stomach fluttered with fear, but beneath it was something steadier. Relief, maybe, or the quiet thrill of not having to split myself into two versions anymore. One who loved Mona in private, and one who erased her in public. The next day at work, Dana cornered me by the coffee machine. "So," she said, grin sly, "you and Mona have any fun plans this weekend?" I felt the old phrase rise in my throat, ready, automatic, just roommates. The words sat there like a familiar coat I could slip into. Instead, I took a breath. I pictured Mona's face under the streetlight. I pictured Leah's gentle eyes across the candlelit table. I pictured the 2 pillows on my bed, the 2 toothbrushes in our bathroom cup, the small domestic evidence of a life we'd built. "We're going to Leah's game night," I said. My voice sounded normal, which surprised me. Dana waggled her eyebrows. "Cute? Roommate bonding?" I smiled, and it felt different than the old too bright smile. This one had edges. This one had spine. "Actually," I said, heart thumping, "she's my partner." Dana blinked. Then her face softened into something like recognition. "Oh," she said, and then simply, "Nice?" That was it. No lightning, no scandal, just one word that didn't shatter me. Later, I texted Mona, I told someone. My hands shook as I typed it. My phone buzzed immediately. "Mona, how do you feel?" Me, like I'm going to throw up and also like I can breathe. Mona, "Good. Come home. I'll make pasta." When I opened the door that evening, the apartment smelled like garlic and warmth. Mona was at the stove in her green sweater, hair down, music playing softly. She turned when she heard me and smiled, wide, unguarded. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I answered, and I walked to her without thinking, fitting my body into the space beside hers like it was made for me. I kissed her cheek, then her mouth, gentle and brief, not a performance, just a fact. For a second, the old fear flared. What if someone saw through the window? What if the neighbors? What if... Then it faded, drowned out by something stronger. The solidness of her hand on my waist, the ordinary clatter of a spoon against a pot, the way love could be both enormous and domestic at once. That night, we climbed into bed and didn't pretend it was temporary. We didn't pretend it was an accident. Mona turned off the lamp, and in the darkness she reached for me the way she always had. "Just roommates?" she murmured, teasing, but her voice held a tremor. I kissed her forehead. "Never were," I whispered. Outside, the city kept humming, indifferent and alive. Inside, in the small space we'd tried so hard to make small, we let the truth take up room. We didn't solve everything in one night. We didn't suddenly become fearless. But we stopped lying automatically. And the next time someone asked, I didn't reach for the key in my pocket. I left the door open.